And even if you're losing the late, you can still get a winner like this. Hey, I thought I won. Oh, absolutely, Steve. Just keeping your place. Like it?
Kodak. We have the clicknology.
For a really refreshing change, forget the wet and get into the dry. Refreshingly dry blackthorn cider.
You shouldn't be out here alone. Big cats are always ready for a feast.
So am I. Have one.
You're full of surprises, Virginia.
She thrilled as Jeremy's perfect teeth bit through the crisp coating, the layer of smooth chocolate ice cream, the solid dark center. Jeremy devoured the Wall's feast.
Jeremy, you're not still hungry, are you?
Only for you, Virginia.
Oh, gosh.
Wall's feast, a truly adult affair.
You know, power costs money. But sometimes the equation doesn't stack up. Over the top or what? So what about this new Renault? A bit more like it, yes? 5 million for a horse. Who's taking who for a ride?
The Renault 21 2-litre turbo.
More than enough power for quite enough money. Thank you.
There's more to life with Renault.
Take a twirl and bite it through the Cadbury's chocolate shell. Taste the chocolate in a bite. Twirled and curled and folded when it comes to a bite you can tell. It's Cadbury's chocolate. You know how good it is. You can't top the taste of a twirl. You can't top it. You can't top the taste of a twirl.
You're waking up and you start to yawn. Then you remember that shoot at dawn. So come on and get up, get the Max in your cup. Just reach out and take that Maxwell House taste. You've got to capture that style and grace. Get the Max, just like Maxwell House captures taste. Get the Max. Maxwell House is the way to the taste of today. Get the Max good and hot, and just one more shot. Get the Max.
Get the taste, get the Max.
In A View from Caterthun, now on 4, the writer and former controller of BBC programmes Stuart Hood goes back to northeast Scotland, where he spent his childhood, to rediscover the past and find out what it means to be Scottish.
Memory is very fallible. When you go further back into childhood, I think memory is extremely selective. Things that frightened or surprised or hit one stand out in some way. I think I've got very clear memories of Caterthun, of the bridge and the moor. Of course, things have changed, but my memory of the place and where to go and so forth, that's quite clearly imprinted. Caterthun, an Iron Age hill fort in what used to be the county of Angus, in northeast Scotland. Map reference NO 548660. Two enormous concentric stone walls enclose an oval area about 150 meters by 67 meters. The entrance is on the southeast. Maybe the Picts, that mysterious people, lived here 2,000 years ago. My name is Stuart Hood. I'm 72 years old. I'm Scottish, whatever that may mean. I'm going to take a train north to the country I effectively left in 1940 to go to the wars. What takes me back is a mixture of things: curiosity, nostalgia, speculations about possible alternatives to my life. I feel that many things bind me to a country to which I didn't return. Curiosity about what has happened to the village of Edzell, to Montrose, that seaside town, and the places where I grew up. In the night, I'll go over a familiar route. In my youth, that led southwards to London, to excitement, cinemas, theatres, art galleries. Great demonstrations in Trafalgar Square to support the Spanish Republic. This is where the journey started from, Edinburgh, where I was a student in the 30s and in the shadow of fascism and war, a place of wartime farewells. Between then and now lie 60-odd years and a career in broadcasting, what nowadays they call the communications industry. Rising to a position of power in the BBC, abdicating from it, earning my living writing scripts, plays, books, novels, an autobiography about my months behind the lines with Italian peasants and partisans, becoming an academic, teaching the young and learning from them. As a boy, I used to come here often, partly just to career down again on my bike, partly for the view. To the north, beyond the hills of Glenesk, lay Aberdeen with its fish-laden quays. To the south, Dundee with its jute mills and slums and wealth. To the east, Montrose with its tidal basin and its beaches and dunes, where I passed my years of adolescence. At my feet, Edzell, which was a village of a couple of thousand souls, with farms in its village streets and 2 smithies. Here my father was headmaster of a little school. One very curious thing is that throughout my life, wherever I might happen to be, in the Libyan desert, for instance, and I was trying to work out north, south, east and west, I always did it with reference to the high street in Edzell because it points due north. I really seem to use it like a compass to orientate myself. So making this film, I'm trying to remember what life was like when I was a small boy in Edzell, and trying to see what changes have taken place in society. Now, my experience is that memory is not to be trusted always. And so I've asked you, and you've kindly come here to help me to put my memory straight.
What sticks out in my memory of the Edzell school was, we used to get a green copybook, don't you remember
yes,
that?
I do.
And there was a line of writing, and you had to copy this writing. And your father was very strict about
2 classes in one room. Yeah. And then there was a wooden partition. There was my father next door, and he was always knocking hell out of people with bills. I got it at home, but you people got it at school. Now, this is a room that I know very well because I was a pupil in this room, and in this end of this big room, which is divided by a glass partition, my father taught. And we sat not like this at tables, in a sort of informal way, but in steps and stairs going up to the back there in desks. Very formal. We weren't allowed to move about. We had to sit and very still. We even did our gym in our desks and our places in the classroom. And then over here, by the door, just here, there was a great big fireplace with a big brass guard came out like that around it. And in the winter, when the kids came in from the country parts, they took off their wet suits and jackets and coats and laid them here to dry in front of the big fire. And what I remember, can't get out of my mind, is the smell of that hot, thick, wet clothing lying there, steaming away most of the day. This end was where the oldest pupils were. And they stayed here until they were about 14, and then would leave. A lot of them went into service, a lot of them went on to land, but other ones went on to better and higher things, I suppose. Now, the discipline was immensely strict. My father was a great disciplinarian, and he really thrashed people right, left, and centre. And so it was very uncomfortable for me to be the son of the dominie, as they called it, and see all this going on in school.
2 classes in your father's room. There was 3 of the Birch family, and on this occasion, for some misdemeanor or other, one was taken out the floor, and your father started laying on the strap. The 2 brothers thought he'd had more than he should have had, and they went out and gave him some support. And there's a tug of war between your father and the strap and the 2 Birch boys. Some great times.
But I can remember him going past here on his bicycle every morning.
What did he look like?
And his white collar and the peaks and the sat on his bike like this, dead straight.
Straight up and down, eh? With a hat on.
Mm-hmm.
Always with a hat, yeah?
And then you had to salute every morning. Aye. Changed days now.
Different days, weren't they? He was, in his own way, a very gifted teacher, and set them to work on projects like building a wheelbarrow and things of that sort. It was very advanced for his day. But of course, it's very odd to come back here and to remember these things, and to see so much change, and I think very much change for the better.
We have our children here from, say, 4.5 years of age to 12, which is quite a long time. And they come from a small community. So the first thing you have to do is try to sort of gauge their needs. Now, especially with glen children, for example, they perhaps need the experience of getting outside the glen and getting out with that environment and seeing that there's a world outside. But this is a mixed community where quite a lot of the children really go on holiday and go in jets and go skiing abroad and so there's a tremendous mixture. So it's much more difficult. And you try to gauge them, and of course, right from the start with children, you're teaching much more than the 3 R's. You're teaching them behavior, you're teaching them how to get on with their peers, you're teaching them all within this manners, all sorts of things. Their emotions come into play. Through team games, they've got to learn to lose as well as win in this world. You've got to teach them interest for leisure, and you hope for cooperation from parents. Perhaps that, in a very general sort of skeleton way, is what we're trying to do.
That's an extraordinary and beautiful place to grow up in, with woods and rivers and things of that kind. And I was really happy the moment I got over the wall and away from my family. That was the main thing to do, was to get away from them. But that was happy. A lot of it was pretty miserable, actually, because to have one's father, who was the headmaster of school, was just death in any case. And then he was a terribly tyrannical and authoritarian creature on the other hand. And that compounded my situation of unhappiness and insecurity of a kind, because he thought it would be quite wrong within the school or anywhere else indeed to say that I'd done anything well, because that would be sort of favoritism, you see. So I was never encouraged anyway. And indeed he had this horrendous saying, which was that, it's a quotation from the Bible, unstable as water thou shalt not excel, which was a death sentence at an early age. So it was happy and unhappy. But I say, the great relief was to get out and to get into nature. And that was marvellous. Picnics up by the Perners Brig, trips up the glen. These were very happy and joyous times. Now this is the North Esk, and the North Esk is the North Water, because that's what Esk means. Esk is the Gaelic for water. And we used to come and play here and fish a great deal. because this was a salmon river, trout river, full of fish in the season of the year. It was a marvellous place to play. It had all sorts of other attractions, such as the fact that down there was a ford where the great carts used to come across from the flour mill and then go up a hill into the village. And beyond, on the sand cliffs there was a place where we used to climb, and on one famous occasion I fell off into the river and lost my school cap, which was the thing that worried me most of the time, not the fact I'd fallen about 40 feet.
Your cap! Your cap! But it finished up in Montrose, I think. It sailed off down the river.
Yes. The thing was, you see, that it wasn't my fault in all this. I saw my cap going downstream, and I was thinking to myself, how am I to explain to my mother? One of the things I find very strange coming back and seeing all these photographs, which I haven't seen for a long time, things like this, is to identify things which I had forgotten, or which I didn't understand as a child. This is one of the interesting things that photographs do for me, is to fill these gaps, you know?
Yes.
And to recognize people, and to see people, and say, that's who that was. For instance, here you've got a photograph of the district nurse who had got a motorbike, which was very advanced in those days. And that was Nurse Dean. She lived on the High Street here. And she went all around the countryside on the motorbike. I grew up here and was formed in this village. And what I think I'm projecting onto it is the problem of the nature of Scottish culture. Should one escape from it? Does one escape from it? Does one accept it? And the dilemmas that poses. And also the question of how, if you look at the narrow parameters that a village like this lays upon life, how one breaks out of them and fulfills oneself. Can one fulfill oneself in a community like this? Obviously one can, but I don't think I could have.
I think any colonised country is going to have a problem about identity, because in a way we want, of course, to communicate to a bigger world. We don't always want to be contemplating our own navels and worrying about identity. But it's always whenever a country is under danger, or a culture is under danger of being completely swamped, that questions of identity become important to us. And I think they're very important to Scots at the moment. I think there's a strong feeling, and I don't think it's unreasonable, that our culture really is under big attack. Not just from England, and I'm not any kind of xenophobe, you know, I really don't believe in that kind of stuff at all, but just from sort of American and kind of general pappy world cultures that just take over and subsume us. You know, the outside world sees us as part of England, and we know we're not, so we're kind of fighting and looking at ourselves, and we don't have real self-confidence. So probably sometimes because of that we stoop to self-parody now and again.
It all started, I think, by a bringing by sale or some kind of, they gathered items together from the houses, and the people in the glen said, just keep it. And with the result from there, this large collection grew. Lord the Housey gave this building to the people of the glen, and it's run by a committee of Glen people, and at the annual general meeting each November we sort of thrash out what's to be done for details for the next year.
It makes one feel immensely old to see these artifacts of our youth.
Yes, it really is. It's looking back onto a different age, isn't it? Something, there's a kind of line that's been drawn across, and these things belong there.
I think
we're in a different world.
we're pleased, really, aren't we, not to have missed it?
And it's interesting too when the people visit the museum. You know, they say, "Oh, well, we used this, and my granny had that," and so on. So, I think it's nice that we've been able to collect many things.
If you're not quick, things would get lost, and they're lost forever. Whereas we need to preserve much of our heritage for the sake of the people that are coming on. In the past, it was very much a study of famous people and kings and the nobility, whereas now the emphasis is more on the common people, the way people lived, and the whole atmosphere and spirit of the people of the past. And if we can preserve some of this, well, we're doing something, I think.
It's very sad to see the tremendous depopulation of the Glen. So many houses, and now farmhouses, standing empty, unoccupied. Many of the young people I know would like to be able to live and work at home in the Glen, but it's not economically viable, and they have to go elsewhere for training and then seek employment elsewhere. We wouldn't want to turn the clock back, I'm sure. I mean, and you can't stop progress. We're glad for all the good things that progress has brought to us, but it's nice to be able to remember the past.
The Dalhouzes actually have been in this part of the world since 1770. There's 8,000 acres of arable land and woodland on the low ground, and about 55,000 acres at the head of Glenesk.
When did the family acquire Glenesk?
In 1715, the fourth Earl of Panmure, who was a Jacobite, bought all the upper waters of the North Esk, all the drainage area, in order to get recruits for the rising in the 15. And in the event, he did in fact take 400 able-bodied men from Glenesk and Edzell to Sheriff Muir, where there was that terrible fiasco. In the Glen, people were, until very recent time, really lived like the Maasai do in Kenya. They lived, and that's up until the middle of the last century anyway. And I mean, they simply lived on blood and milk and oats, and they were entirely self-sufficient.
What about people coming for the shooting? What sort of people came? I remember Pierpont Morgan, the American millionaire came, didn't he?
Yes.
But then there were all sorts of Indian princes came.
Yes, they came to remember.
Nabobs.
I remember
That
them
was
arriving one night.
the Maharaja of
Yes.
Alwar, and Maharini arrived by special train.
Yes.
That was in 1929. I can remember that date because I took a certain girl home from the station that night and haven't got rid of her since.
They lived up in the shooting lodges, was that? They were up the Glen, basically.
No, well, this Indian bloke lived in the Panmure Hotel.
Panmure Hotel.
With all his retinue.
When the Maharani was going up in the car, she got up and bowed to every cow.
There always have been, and still are, a sufficient number of rich men who are interested in shooting grouse and prepared to pay for it. And today in Glenesk, there are probably as many or more families engaged in the shooting industry than there are in the farming industry.
Well, you had this extraordinary feudal system
Yeah,
around here, didn't you? It was a very feudal place because you took, for instance, up at the Ganachie, you had McElroy's of the Burn estate. And my mother was walking down the high street with my brother. And Miss McElroy came down in her pony and trap. And my brother, who was about 7, I suppose, was tardy in taking off his cap. Whereupon Miss McElroy stopped her trap and told my mother off for this lack of reverence to the landed gentry. It was amazing stuff. But what's that?
Well, that's the old Free Kirk.
Oh, yes. That's the one that's just been knocked down.
In fact, you lived next door.
I was born in the house next door. Yes. One memory I have is walking down the street from our house and coming to a corner, and I think I had an air gun or some weapon of some kind, and I was boasting about shooting lions and tigers, and a big dog came around the corner, and I hid behind my mother quickly to escape this monstrous animal. And that's the sort of thing one remembers, partly because this became a story in the family, which my mother told again and again. One of the very odd things about wandering about in one's childhood is one understands how much one didn't understand at the time. There are great gaps in my memory, simply because there are houses there. I had no idea who lived in them, who the hell they were, what they were doing. I have memories of old ladies, maiden ladies living together who must have been very well heeled to be able to live like that in great big houses. But who they were or where they got the wealth from, I have no idea, and I couldn't tell you now. And there are houses in the village of Edzell which I just don't remember. They're sort of blanks in my map of memory. And then, of course, one very odd thing that at one spot in Montrose, when we were driving past a cemetery, my mental image of it is that it's on the other side of the road. It's on the left and not on the right, as I thought it should have been. I was quite disoriented for a moment. And I think that's quite a common trait of memory, a trick of memory, that you get things, the visual memory gets turned around in some very curious way. Do you remember when people used to get onto the shack and brig and we used to go up on the chains and make it go like that? Particularly for the visit. So this is the shack and brig, the shaking bridge. And as children, one of our great joys was to wait till strangers to the village got onto it, and then we made the whole thing go oscillate backwards and forwards to their terror and our delight. And we used to fish from here, because the fish lay down in the pools down in the bottom here. And you could see them very clearly. In this pool, they found a drowned servant girl. That was one of the mysteries of my childhood. Never explained, never really talked about. Was she pregnant, lonely, depressed? I don't know.
You can tell what some cats have been eating just by watching them. Whiskers. Now it's even tastier. And that's better for both of you.
From Mama Nature comes a perfect Italian bolognese sauce, and there are no artificial ingredients. Now all this natural goodness is captured in Dolmio. Dolmio sauce for bolognese. Just add it to mince and simmer. For the perfect spaghetti bolognese, Dolmio. The best from Mama Nature.
John washes carefully every day.
So does Rick.
John's soap smells nice.
Rick's face wash clears away grease.
John's soap's a pretty colour.
Rick's helps clear pore clogging dirt and kills bacteria.
John's soap's got a fancy name.
Rick's face wash is called Biactol.
John's spots are a problem.
Rick's aren't.
John doesn't like being spotted.
Neither does Rick. For fewer spots, wash with Biactol. It's better than soap and water, John.
And it's another wonderful day with WFLH on the Miami beaches with
Temperatures in the 80s and sunshine all the way.
I looked out this morning and the sun was gone. Turned on some music to start my day. Lost myself in a familiar song. I closed my eyes and she slipped away.
When people come together, they make a force to be reckoned with. And over 1.5 million people make Standard Life one of the largest mutual life assurance companies in Europe. And as we don't have any shareholders, there's more for the people who entrust their pensions and savings to our experts. Standard Life. We're better off together.
I was brought up to think that books were the key to reality and to the world and to all knowledge. I think that's very Scottish. And it's very Scottish, too, that this library here was set up and endowed by a man from the village who became head of the London Stock Exchange and presented the whole place to the village, complete with 3,000 books. And I define myself as Scottish because in some quite essential way, I bear the stamp of this culture and this society, which I can't get rid of and don't want to get rid of. And I've always felt that I carry it with me. But for the war, I think I'd have stayed on and become a teacher in Scotland. But I was torn out at a quite crucial stage, and I think there was a sort of trauma and break there. A lot of people in this part of the world in the 20s emigrated to Canada with some sort of assisted governmental scheme. And one of my best friends, Willie Torrey, a ploughman's son, suddenly left and went off to Alberta, I think. I was in Calgary, Alberta once, and the phone book was full of Tories.
Scotland in the past has had a lot of people who've been very poor and have moved to Canada, moved to New Zealand or whatever, but that Scotland's also been complicit in the British Empire. It would be foolish of anybody that's Scottish to try to say that Scotland's history is a pure history of kind of workerism or of idealism. I mean, Scotland has been very involved in the slave trade and involved in the colonisation, particularly of Jamaica. So I feel that when we talk of Scotland, we have to talk about the things that lie geographically outside Scotland. There's the Scottish pop group, the Proclaimers, and very neatly they says, do we have to roam the world to prove how much it hurts? And I think for a lot of Scottish people there is that dynamic that they leave Scotland, and to some extent the leaving is painful, and they create the image of Scotland as being this great place to which one day they will return. So the idea is that Scottish people escape away from some kind of economic deprivation or away from something that they perceive as not giving them the fulfilment that they want in their lives. And as soon as they're away, they create Scotland in their minds mythically as a nirvana to which someday they'll return. So you have this odd sort of illusion of Scotland as the dump and Scotland as the great place.
When I was younger, I had to say, would I be better off in Scotland or leaving, emigrating? The answer was emigrating. And I had to ask myself why. Were we too poor, too stupid as a people? The answer kept coming back, no. The answer was until we got control of our own destiny. And we work it out in a Scottish way. And it's a different kind of politics. Tensions are always there. That's history, that's politics. But it would be the Scottish way. And Scotland, again, could contribute to the world.
That was the Scottish nationalist MP for this part of the world. I feel like saying, all right then, you get your own parliament and you have control over your own affairs. And my feeling is that this is where you then get the oppositions coming coming to the surface between different class interests, different economic and social interests. It's just not possible, in my view, to have an uncomplicated, common national aim.
I think that a large part of rural Scotland, having been Tory for so long, is something that's first of all breaking down, not just in the sense that the SNP have won Bamford, Buchan, Murray and Angus East. It's interesting, for example, that the SNP won not because the Labour vote collapsed, but despite the Labour vote actually going up in all of these three constituencies. And I think what we're seeing in rural Scotland is not so much a move to socialism, far from it, but what we are seeing is a move away from Toryism, is an increasing rejection by Scottish working people, whether urban or rural, of the underlying ideas that dominate English politics today. The market economy, the kick the other man down the ladder so you can get one step further up. And in that sense, I'm not pessimistic. I think that there are changes in Scottish politics which are taking place not only in the urban areas, but in the rural areas too. But that's part of a tradition, isn't it? There is the tradition, the anti-landlord tradition, the tradition, if you like, of independent thinking that if we go back even to the Reformation, the idea that in Scotland people didn't listen to the given wisdom. Every layperson had a right to argue their own position. And I think that that's coming out to a certain extent in Scotland. The tragedy, I think, is that there is nothing positive into which it's being channeled. And nationalism in Scotland is a reasonably reactionary force, and certainly the SNP, and undoubtedly the SNP's leading figures in the North East, and by no means progressive political elements. But the support they're gaining is certainly an anti-establishment, anti-Tory movement.
This is Edzell Castle. The Lindsay's built it. The great family that ruled here with power over life and death, with pit and gallows, as I said. I expect people will say that Mary Queen of Scots stayed here. She stayed in a lot of places. And walked in this pleasance, this pleasure garden. She's the kind of romantic figure that dominates and distorts Scottish history.
I'm probably a typical product of Scottish schools. I was not taught Scottish literature and not taught terribly much Scots history. It tends to be at primary school level. Bonnie Prince Charlie and Bruce and Spiders and all that sort of stuff. And I don't think it's treated as seriously as it should be. That if a country doesn't teach its own children its own history, then it's lost.
Well, it's a different world, isn't it? I mean, you go into any place, there's no the hands employed any place now that there is, or they're machines, isn't it? So, I mean, they'd been apprenticed at your father's and all that, isn't there? There was always work for the village folk, wasn't there?
The average family numbered round about 4 and sometimes 5, and at the Mains of Edzell, which is the biggest farm in the district, they had about 8 pair of horses, an ore beast as they called it, and yes, that's right. There was a bothy.
2 cattlemen. There was the grieve, and there was as many in the bothy as well.
So there must be about 20 people on the farm.
And today, one family plus another chap works that same.
Now, when I was a small boy and used to come to the Mains of Edzell here, there were all these horses. There were 7 pairs of horse. And what have you got today? How many horses have you got today?
Oh, we don't have any horses.
What you got then?
Not tractors. Instead, there are about 6 tractors and a few loaders.
And is there a man to each tractor?
Yes, more or less.
And so that's really, you've got 6 hands on the farm.
Yes.
Your son, he hopes to go into farming.
Yes, he's hoping to go into farming.
Would he take over the tenancy here sometime?
Well, that would be for the Earl of Dalhousie to decide possibly, but yes, he'd be hoping to. But give him a few years to find out if that's what he really wants to do first, because it's rather a big undertaking.
So this is the Earl of Dalhousie's land?
Yes.
And you're tenants of his?
Tenants of his. My husband has been since 1931. Well, his family.
So they've got quite secure tenure in that case?
Yes. Yes, I don't think it would be much problem apart from his age. He's only, well, he's still a minor. It would be some years before he was considered as a joint tenant, I would imagine.
That's your son?
Yes. Yes, yes.
Yes, because he would have to sort of prove that he could do the job, would he, before the Dalhousie would let him take over?
Yes, of course. It would be in Dalhousie's interest to see that it was properly farmed. But
and all this country around here is Dalhousie, all the way down to Edzell and all round that way?
Yes.
Because your farm runs from here right down to the village, doesn't it?
Yes, right from the top of Edzell Hill down
up
to
there, all the way down to
the golf course. Yes.
To the Westwater.
In fact, they used some of the farm lands to make the golf course.
There's been a tremendous change over the last years. And originally, an estate worked entirely on leasing out land to farmers and living off the rent, and I'm going back 100 years or more. Today, it doesn't work like that. An estate as such has to think of other things if it's going to remain viable.
The city is the big centre of activity at the moment.
Yeah.
And some people might argue that people like yourself are in a part of society which is becoming obsolete.
Oh, I know. Well, I think that there's always been a great divide between town and country. I hope one's not actually obsolete, because my life seems to be really rather a busy one. Whether it's usefully spent, I would hate to say. Over the centuries, the role of a landowner or a landlord has totally changed. And really now it's to see that those who live on and buy the land are still well done by as one can. Whereas in the old days it was a reverse. And they had to see that one was as well done by. But I think that it does carry still very serious responsibilities. And I think there is a very deep down social obligation involved.
I'm sure Dalhousie thinks very hard and says, who would the best tenant be? Because that will keep the land going and it won't become depopulated. But then there's his actual position as a landowner, who every now and then is going to sell off a bit of land for a few £1 million. He's caught within a contradiction of his class, as we all are in many ways. The working class is caught in its own contradictions. The middle class and middle-class intellectuals, we're all caught in contradictions. If you take a feudal landowner, he may be a very decent man who's trying to do his best for his tenants, for his gamekeepers and that sort of thing, for the community as he sees it. But his actual position within society only allows him to do that in a very limited way. And so, for instance, he can't allow Glens to be opened up for everyone to use for hiking and climbing, which would be a sensible thing to do, because that cuts across his interests as a landowner who lets it out to rich men to come and shoot deer and grouse.
The fascinating thing with the land is the enormity of the confidence trick that's carried out. I mean, you're talking about foreign people coming in and buying up land just through the power of the checkbook. You're talking about the so-called noble families who've inherited it because of the theft or the chicanery of their forebears, and yet they somehow manage to pose as the custodians, you know, on behalf of the people of Scotland. But nobody's elected them, nobody's appointed them, they just assumed this role. And they seem to regard land the same way that you and I would regard having a car or having a house or having a television set. In actual fact, they're sitting on the most fundamental resource that belongs by right to the people of Scotland, to the entirety of the people of Scotland. And as well as the land, they've got all the mineral wealth and all the resources that go with the land. The salmon that's out of the Atlantic comes up the river, comes up the loch, it belongs to the landlord. The deer that yesterday's grazing free on the one hill comes over the fence into Angus, into a particular estate, and it belongs to that landlord. And the grouse that's flying free one day on that side of the glen crosses over, and it's suddenly the property of the landlord. And now, of course, in the north, the trees that the crofters plant, the crofter nurtures and looks after the trees. When that crop comes to fruition, it'll be the property of the landlord. They used to say in the old days, when land was a big question, you know, 100 years ago, it was a wonder that even the air that blew across the glens didn't belong to the landlord, and he taxed you just for breathing it. At the moment, we have the worst record in Europe for the concentration of feudal private ownership by a privileged few. If we break that, then you do get a free Scotland. You get a Scotland free and in control of its own resources, and a Scotland that's free of privilege and inequality. And then we, the Scottish people, can take back that which is rightfully ours, which is the land of Scotland itself.
You saved my life the other night.
The dinner party.
The coffee. Very successful.
How can you ever thank me?
I'll try and think of something. In the meantime, at least I can return your gold blend.
Look, I'm in the middle of something right now, but perhaps...
Perhaps.
Now, golden roasted, richer, smoother, Nescafe Gold Blend.
Just my neighbor. How's the coffee?
Perfect. Where'd you get it from?
I have it delivered.
I used to only get pushed out on Sundays, then pushed straight back again. But that was before Oxo Gravy Boat came along. Ready-made gravy, made from real meat stock. Here we go again. Lovely. And again. Marvellously meaty. No rest for the wicked. It's all go.
Did you see that? A talking gravy boat.
Gravy Boat from Oxo. Push it out every day.
Can't read my own handwriting. Looks like a frying pan.
I think it's marvellous that Asda's fish fingers have no additives or colouring.
Oh, frozen peas.
Petit pois for me, love.
Now, where's the rice?
Brown rice is the thing, of course. We eat it all the time. Julian won't go without it.
I put brown rice.
Natural fibre. You know, a whole Viet Cong cadre could exist on...
I've taken it.
And they didn't eat meat either.
Who?
The Viet Cong. It's a shame, really, because Asda have lovely continental cuts. What do you think of Wiener Schnitzel?
I don't follow the tennis.
Oh, maybe some kebabs. Did you know the Greeks didn't invent the kebab?
Reminds me, yoghurt.
It was the Turks, actually.
Well, they have Greek yoghurt here at Asda.
Not the real stuff. They couldn't. On second thoughts.
Do they have skirts in menswear?
Oh, they seem to have everything else, love.
Asda. One trip and you're laughing.
It's golden drummers for tea. Yeah.
After a great day on the river, the cubs really enjoy my tasty golden drummers. Tender turkey shaped into boneless drumsticks in golden crispy crumbs.
These look nice.
Now, lads, cubs honour, what's the word for my golden drummers? Be prepared with my golden drummers, around 99 pence per 6.
Now, you come from a different part of the world.
Yes, I come from Buchan, about, well, north of Aberdeenshire. It's a part that sticks out into the sea, and we seem to have been left with our language that was used long ago.
Do your children understand when you talk Buchan?
Well, my husband also came from Buchan. He came down here in 1931, and I've been down here for 20 years. So we just carry on our conversation in Buchan. The children don't speak the Buchan. They don't know how to pronounce it, I don't think, but they certainly understand it. They know what their cousins are talking about from the north.
And they still talk,
yes,
they?
Oh, very much so, yes.
No, you weren't allowed to use it in the classroom. I wasn't allowed to use it at home, but you know, if you're out playing, we had all sorts of things.
Yeah. My dad spoke to some people one day that had been up the hills, and they said, "Oh, we understand the Scotch, you know, dialect." And he said, "Well, you'll be fair for fucking stacher now they rock catches." They didn't know what the hell he was saying.
Yes.
We spoke dialect at home all the time. And it was only at school that we couldn't speak dialect in school. And this really affected our classwork, it must have done, because all our thinking was done in the dialect, in the Buchan.
Well, it was Hugh McDermott that wrote the lines, "To be yourself and to make that worth being, nae harder job to mortals has been given." In Scotland, linguistic security is one of the main barriers from being yourself. If you're a Scots speaker, then your language is devalued, rubbished as soon as you come into contact with officialdom. For most folk, that begins at primary school and then gets worse in later life. I think everybody's affected to some extent. In Scotland, often to get on in life means to get out and ditch the culture that made you. And I feel, how can you be fully yourself when you're projecting an image that rejects half of what made you what you are? I think for the writer, this presents a glorious opportunity for tension and exploring that tension. But for the ordinary person, it just produces another layer of confusion where pride and shame and Scottishness mingle and vie with each other for supremacy, and none of them ever win.
Well, the village was full of shops in the old days.
I think...
Absolutely. How many were there?
Thinking back to
16.
Pre-war years, I remember Dora and I counting the number of shops and businesses we had in the village, and it was near 30, 25.
Yes. Shoemakers.
2 blacksmiths. 2 butchers.
And rattles.
You used to go and spend your Saturday penny. I used to spend my Saturday pennies. We used to have these extraordinary soirees in the village hall. Yeah. You went in, you were given a bag with a couple of cakes and some sweeties. I feel a bit of a stranger. Yes, I think I'm a stranger here, really. I feel there are all these very nice people whom we talk to and who come up and meet, but I feel a great stranger to them. They seem to have a more immediate perception of me than I have of them, which is somewhat distressing because I don't know why this should be. Spooky, actually. No, I think I couldn't have done this if I hadn't come to terms with it a long time ago by writing about it. Yeah, I feel pretty detached from it at the present time. How do American personnel perceive Scotland when they come here first?
Well, you know, most people know very little about Scotland or Great Britain as a whole prior to arriving, outside of what they've seen in movies or read in books and such. And so it's initial expressions, or they're looking for fog and rain, and they mix Scotland in with England. But when they get here after a while and they're adjusted and they see we get sunny days and we get warm days, and we have 4 seasons in Scotland, just like anywhere else in the world.
In spite of its name, RAF Edzell is an American base. Actually, the Americans were here in the First World War, and one of my very earliest memories is of being put in the cockpit of the plane at Edzell Station by an American airman. Nowadays, like all American bases, this is really a small American town, complete with supermarkets and all that goes with them. The American way of life, in short. It's also one of the most important listening posts in the whole of Northern Europe, part of Fortress Scotland.
The U.S. Navy arrived at Edzell in 1961, and so we've had 27 years of integration into the local communities of Montrose and Edzell and the areas. And our people come here, their goal is not to make Edzell and the area a little of America, but to integrate.
What are you doing here?
Well, why the U.S. military is here?
Yeah.
Well, first and foremost, we're here for communications. We're a communications base and support not only the U.S. military, but the British forces, the Royal Navy, and NATO forces in the area of electronic communications.
Condensation trails disturb me, scarring the soft flesh of the sky. Up there are eyes that read the number plates of cars, see salmon in the pools, tracks in the bracken, hillside springs. As they spy out the antennae, the installations, the listening posts beside the long, straight, Langstracht road of my childhood. All now, road, spring, tracks, installations, ringed on a map, first strike targets.
The village was just divided in 2 by the churches.
That's right. Yes, the Free Kirk people and the parish Kirk
Yes,
people.
and each had their own grocer and their own tailor and their own butcher. Yes.
So there were 2 churches, the Old Kirk and the Free Kirk. And the village was more or less split down the middle on these lines, and by and large, and this is a huge generalization, the Old Kirk was the kirk of the big farmers, and the Free Kirk was seen as the more liberal one. My father, who refused to have anything to do with a state church, belonged to the Free Kirk. What is the role of the church in Scotland today, would you say?
It is to worship God, to bring a sense of the greatness of God towards people, and to meet people's deepest needs. I think, in that sense, the church's role has remained the same. Yes, there are undercurrents, but I think the essential task, which is to preach the word and to meet people's needs, deepest needs, is still there.
In my young days, the church was a very repressive factor in one's life. One felt very much dominated. The village was dominated really by the 2 ministers and by my father as the headmaster, the dominic. And I imagine that has slackened off. The other thing was that one felt religion in a particular way as a dampening force. I mean, like one wasn't allowed to whistle on Sundays or play with the ball. If you went to walk the golf course, you had to not run about too much.
Yes.
Now, that presumably has gone.
So far, there has the pendulum swung that people now, younger people, are almost frightened to go to church because they're frightened that somebody will laugh at them if they go into church or something like that. And the opposite is happening, whereas they're hanging around bored on the street corner. Of course, the problem there is that vision is limited. They haven't now got the opportunity to come and hear the issues and speak about the things that really matter deeply in life.
I want to get away from here, really to lead my own life. But I would like to come back and see just, you know, how the kids are getting on. Like our age, then see if we feel the same way as the parents like nowadays.
Some people say that children today are not as well behaved as we were. But I think we got up to things too, didn't we?
Oh, yeah. Sure, in the village we did.
Because I can...
We didn't get found out. See, that was the...
Because
yeah, I think in their days, you know, they were all well behaved and that, but when they see people like us running about the streets at all hours of the night and everything.
Did you believe that? Do you believe they were all well behaved?
No. They all done everyone done something wrong, didn't they?
You've got everybody looking in at you, you know, everybody knows everybody. It's a typical village.
It was always terrible. You could never do anything but your mother did in half an hour.
It's a super village to grow up in, but when you get to about 13, there's nothing really for you to do.
What do you think of the young people today?
Well, the thing is, I think that they were very much suppressed, the children at that time. And now they may seem wilder, but it's much better for them to be free to express themselves. I think it's a better thing. Although we think they're cheeky and all the rest of it, they just get different treatment now.
I would like a job and stay in Edzell, like, but I think I'll have to move somewhere to get a job, probably England or something. Just to get a steady job, something with prospects and that. Because getting that in the village here, in the future.
My brother had a job up here, like, but it was like a dead-end job, and he's been down to Swindon now. And he's had 4 different jobs since he's been down there. He's got one he likes now. So I was thinking about doing the same thing.
The girls went into service, and the boys went onto the land, yes? But what did you do, Ina, when you left?
I was in service too.
Where was that?
My first place was Gallery House. You know where Gallery House is?
Yes.
It was a retired captain. Captain Purvis was his name, and wife, and there was Enos, the daughter.
But what did you get paid in those days for that?
30 shillings in the month.
And how much time did you get off?
Oh, 1 day a week. 1 day a week, and then every other Sunday.
What are the chances for young women in the village?
There's more chance than what there is for boys, because there's more cafes and shops. You know, like, girls are more appropriate to work in than boys.
Some girls want to do careers, but working in a shop, it just gets you nowhere. It's just...
So really girls don't get the same chances. Their jobs are not going to take them anywhere.
Yeah, that's right.
That's the problem, isn't it?
Yeah, because girls are classed as housewives and that, and bring up the children. But some women don't want to do that. So I think everybody should have an equal chance.
So, what's Fiona?
Right.
Where you are?
I think that women have been allocated the role of holding all the tenderness, all the softness, all the warmth, and that has left men to stand outside and be the hard people, like the image of the Scottish god whom they've set up as being somebody strong and detached and cold. Now, in fact, women let men get away with this. You know, they let them be like that because they're sorry for them, and they treat them as children. And I think that's a mistake. I think women have also got to make the demand that men should be their equals. And in Scotland in particular, we've had a lot of very strong Scottish women, particularly in the working class. And if you go now into the housing schemes, you'll find that it's the women who are doing all the work to keep the organisations going that bring the life and vitality into the schemes. Every voluntary organisation has women working out, but who's the chairman? Who's the secretary? It's always a man. I think women are making a great mistake if they think that they can solve the problem by just being like Scottish men, because Scottish men are pretty awful, actually, in their attitudes, and it's they who need to change. And I think that we've got a long, long way to go. There was a big change after the Second World War, but in fact, it didn't last very long. And unfortunately, with the kind of government policies we have in social security, it's getting much harder for women. The position of working class women in the last 10 years is deteriorating rapidly. The poverty, particularly, that single women find themselves in.
I've heard People say that the village is a very close-knit community, but I'm afraid I disagree in that respect compared to what it used to be in our young day, because in our young day, everybody who lived in the village worked in the village, but now today we have a lot of commuters who just sleep here promptly. They leave in the morning and they come back in the afternoon.
They go to work in nearby towns, in Montrose, for instance, and in this industrial complex. The site was chosen by Glaxo, fourth biggest company in Britain, because there was a river handy and a pool of labour in the hinterland. Glaxo works 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. A very different story from my youth, when the local mill worked only 2 or 3 days a week. And what would you say was your contribution to Montrose as a community?
Well, I suppose, in a simplistic sense, the first contribution I see is simply the fact that in the last financial year we paid out a total of over £9 million in wages and salaries and remuneration to the staff here, and I think that's something that shouldn't be overlooked. We do, however, try and do as much as we reasonably can as a company in supporting local charities, local events, and quite a number of our staff play quite a leading role in various clubs and societies and so on in the town.
It's difficult to disentangle the exact effects of multinational investment from the other factors influencing Scotland's economic development, but there are perhaps three fairly clear factors, I think, or three fairly clear effects. One is that the multinational companies have absorbed quite a lot of public money in the form of development grants, which might have been used to try and build up locally owned and controlled Scottish firms. The second factor is that the attempt to attract more and more multinationals to Scotland, more and more foreign capital into Scotland, has engrossed perhaps too much of the attention of Scotland's economic policymakers when they should have been applying it to the less glamorous task and perhaps more difficult task of building up local industry. And the third factor is that there's no doubt that the dominance which foreign capital now exerts in the Scottish economy has helped to weaken the sort of social and economic base upon which Scotland must depend for its longer-term economic development.
When I was a boy, only 2 boats put in here regularly, shipping beer and potatoes to the working-class pubs and chippies of Tyneside. The harbour's busy today, although it hasn't been quite as busy since the falling off of North Sea oil. In my young days, there was unemployment too, of course. Some working-class boys went off to be soldiers into the pockets of slums. My father, by now headmaster of a local school, had to sign forms for children to get free boots. It went against the grain. If his mother had managed, why couldn't other mothers? So Montrose has been lucky. Yet there's still a lot of unemployment, and it doesn't really look as if young people here rate their chances any higher than they do in Edzell.
When you live in a small town like Montrose, I certainly have a view that it's very difficult to carve one's own niche out in that community. And for youngsters on the threshold of adulthood, it's even more difficult, because I think there are personal expectations, I mean, from within their families about what they will do in the future. I think it's more difficult for them to gain status that would satisfy the wishes of their parents and their own needs, because they don't have employment, they don't have access to they don't have the Levi Jeans 501 lifestyle. And I think that is the epitome of the problem, that it's very difficult for them to fulfill the aspirations that they're getting daily from television, from the press. It's not something that Montrose has a monopoly on, that's clearly the case, but it's brought into sharp focus where unemployment is high amongst young people who don't have employment.
I notice I've been teaching 9 years now. When I started work first, almost every pupil who left school got a job, whether it was on the land, whether it was going into college in Dundee, or they went off to do something, further education, or got a job. Now they don't. I don't know anyone who gets what we would call a real job. It's usually a scheme. Well, in the area around here, I can't see that there's much hope of any.
I see people coming back to my outpatient clinic in utter despair, simply because they don't have a job and there is no prospect of them of a job. And that's something I've noticed.
We are aware that we have lost something, in the sense of our ability to get through and appeal to younger people. Perhaps it's the great media today, which has this...
Now, superficially looking at the towns and villages around this part of the world, they're very neat, they're very clean, they're well kept. Is there poverty behind this neatness and cleanness?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There's a substantial amount of poverty. I think the poverty of lack of cash is a big problem, but I think there's poverty of opportunity as well. Certainly in my working experience, but socially as well, I'm aware that there are a lot of people who have to do without. And I think there aren't the supports in the community in a way.
But I can remember him going past here on his bicycle every morning.
We wouldn't want to turn the clock back, I'm sure. I mean, and you can't stop progress.
I think I'll have to move somewhere to get a job, probably England or something.
Changed days now.
Different days, weren't they?
The average family numbered round about 4 and sometimes 5, and the main it is.
I'm coming more and more to the conclusion that it is, in a very broad sense of the word, a political formation that makes one Scottish. That's to say that I grew up in a particular kind of society with particular values, with a particular ideology, in a particular educational system, in the shadow of a particular church, and the ethos of that kind of Protestantism hanging over me. And if you have that, if you are enveloped in that from one's earliest times and up into one's adolescence, it then marks one in a quite specific way, and I would say that the end result is a Scot.
Next week, the 11th Hour looks at the views held by different members of the Peace Convoy, who are seeking to re-establish what they see as the ancient right to celebrate the midsummer solstice at Stonehenge. Spirit of Albion is at 10 to 11 next Monday. Well, next this Monday, a second chance to see Network 7, included in this week's